Welcome to Building My Legacy podcast. This podcast is designed for leaders and entrepreneurs who want to leave a legacy and will provide strategies that focus upon key elements for legacy creation, determining your desired impact and its benefit, increasing your legacy's reach by engaging key stakeholders, planning, prioritizing, and executing. Here's your host, Dr. Lois Sonstegard.
Welcome, everybody, to today's podcast, Building My Legacy. I have with us again Celina Souffrant. She is a brand specialist. She does brand marketing and also does a tremendous amount of work looking at impact measurement and social responsibility. Today, that's an incredibly important concept that we all are going to have to address. And today, in follow-up and in continuation with this discussion that we've begun, we want to talk about what are those UN requirements that they have set forth so we can be better prepared and more knowledgeable. So, Celina, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you can begin the discussion, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. I think that sounds fantastic. I think before we kind of dive into it, let me give you an overarching summary of what exactly we mean by the UN Sustainable Development Goals for, any of your listeners who might not have heard of it. So basically in September of 2015, every member of the United Nations, there's 193 member states that are involved, basically adopted a plan for achieving a better future. So they laid out a plan for the next 15 years that will go through basically 2016 through 2030 that laid out objectives that they wanted to meet with the ultimate, kind of result being that we have a more inclusive, environment, that we are fighting inequality and that the world is becoming a better place and we're protecting our planet as a result. So that's kind of what the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and we can kind of go a little bit deeper. There are 17, so it's kind of a lot, and we don't have to deep dive into every one, but just to kind of give you a couple of, ideas of what those goals are, and then, we can maybe, if there are certain ones that, really pique your interest, we can dive deeper. But, no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, gender equality, quality education, clean water, affordable and clean energy, a decent work environment, reduced inequality, climate action, life below water, life on land, and then a place in justice, and just, again, well-standing and partnerships for all. So they're broad, they're kind of very ambitious, they cover a lot of different categories, and I think really what the implications are for businesses, kind of what we touched on in our last conversation, figuring out what your business's objective and mission is, then incorporating sustainability into that so that you can drive change that's actually meaningful and not just slapped on in an attempt to get people to buy your products or your services and quote unquote greenwashing.
Right. So as I listen to that list, first of all, let's in our show notes put a link to that UN site.
I've got them already for you.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Because I think it's something you really want to think about and let it really sink into you, because it is so comprehensive. And truly, if you dealt with every single one of those, it would fundamentally change probably everything, depending upon how you define each of those items, right?
I agree, but I also think that no one can tackle everything. I honestly think it's better to go deep on one, and versus going broad on a lot. Because again, if you're someone who says that you're a master of all trades, no one's going to believe you, right? And there's so many ambitious goals that I think it's important just to start again where you're at, and then tackling again either what has the most kind of incremental value to you as a company, or what's something that your consumers and your stakeholders are going to believe in. But ultimately, again, if your consumers believe something but you can't deliver it, then I wouldn't recommend going down that route. I think really thinking about what you can do. So for example, I'm in the tech industry, and companies like Google and Apple are really upping their recycling programs and focusing on e-waste, because apparently e-waste is worth over $65 billion annually. That's how much it costs us.
Tell me, what is e-waste?
E-waste is anything that's a byproduct of technology. So your cell phone, your computer, batteries, anything after, because you use your product, they have a limited, timeline, right? And then after they're done, what are you doing with them? So I think that, again, really thinking about how can we cycle, and it's something called the circular economy, where you're thinking about how you're sourcing from, the get-go. Where are you actually getting those materials? What does the logistics look like, getting them from their place of origin to you or to your production facility? How are you being sustainable in assembly and thinking about energy and your carbon emissions and your data centers? Then when it's all packaged up, you got to ship it to the consumer somehow or to your product stores. So again, you have those transportation costs, carbon emissions, gas, all of those things, right? And then the consumer gets the product, and then within 5 years, or maybe even 2 for some people, they're going to recycle them or get rid of them. So, really thinking about sustainable consumption and from start to finish, the entire life cycle of a product, how can consumers be more sustainable as a whole? Right. And so again, when you're tying that back into the UN Sustainable Development Goals, that's where you can think about climate action or responsible consumption and production, or even good health and well-being. And so that's where, if you have that overarching framework as a landmark, maybe you play bingo and you say, I can do 3 across for now. And then that's where I'm at, and I'll focus on the things that will help me get there. Then maybe 2 or 3 years down the road, I'll pace myself and say, okay, now it's time to tackle something else. Maybe I'm going to take money and profits and invest it in quality education programs or into sustainable development in my community. And then you can, again, keep crossing off those lists. But again, don't do them all. Just focus on 1 or 2 that you can do well and establish your leadership in that area, and then expand out.
Part of what I'm hearing you say, Celina, is it's doing something that's important, and then communicating what it is that you're doing. Because I think there are people who probably are doing things that follow that, and they just don't get the message out, that they probably don't know about these 17 criteria, first of all, right? And the importance of communicating that. Your perspective.
100%. I totally agree with you. And again, that's where my marketing brain, kind of clicks on. And I'm like, wait a minute, because I know a lot of people who are totally impact driven, but they're not talking about it. And they're thinking about, especially if they're product based, they're focusing on the quality attributes of the product, or they're thinking about price savings or whatever. But, there's something called emotional and functional product benefits, and you need to balance both. And the emotional part is where your sustainable development or your sustainable, commitments come into play. So that's where on your website, in the About Us section or in the mission, page, talking about what you care about and how these purchases are helping. Or maybe you have a blog post, and when you're coming up with your content calendar twice a month, make sure you're hitting that emotional button, right? Or you're doing a case study or a products feature on one of your artisans who's making your products. Or even if you're service oriented, again, talking about, oh, hey, my team and I took an afternoon to clean up a local park. Or, hey, did you know that, we have an internship program that's only for, disadvantaged youths in our community because we're trying to give back. So, and again, posting it on social media, on your LinkedIn. So, they both come into play. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't, use this again as a marketing vehicle. It's much deeper than that. But what I'm saying is, if you're going to do something, make sure you're reporting on that impact as well, because it's going to help your business so much. And if you're doing it, why wouldn't you talk about it?
So when a company just decides that they want to go down this road, and I think it is going to be, it's not if you want to go down this road, it's when you get started going down this road, because it will be a requirement, I think, increasingly, if you're going to be respected, if you want a reputation that precedes you as being conscious, it's something you're going to have to do. So when you get started, where do people begin with this discussion? And I'll let you go from there.
Yeah, sure. So again, whenever I'm working with clients, again, the first thing I do is taking it back to what is your core brand identity. And again, we talked about this a little bit last time, so I won't go too deep into it, but basically it's just understanding who are you, what do you care about, and what is that brand promise that you're making to your stakeholders, your customers, etc. Once you understand what that is, then from there you think about, okay, well, what are the metrics that I need to measure that align with that brand personality? So for example, I worked with a home furnishing company who was kind of doing a couple of different things. They were sourcing FSC certified wood, they were employing local artisans in their community, and they were taking profits and donating it to a local school. So there were kind of 3 different factors there that they had, so they're working with, again, there's that local community element, there's the children and equality and education, and then there's the biodiversity, right, in the rainforest that they were sourcing from. So taking those 3 things, you can create these impact categories. And 3 isn't too much. If you think, again, if that all kind of plays into your story, you can definitely highlight them because different customers are going to care about different things. Some people are really going to care about, the sourcing and the wood, and some people care about the kids and making sure that, my purchase is making a difference. So then what you're going to do is create those indicators that are going to show how you're tracking your progress over time. So that's where we create a framework. And I have my own that I've developed over time, but there's also there's something called the IRIS reporting framework that I'll link in the show notes as well, that kind of gives you a start. It's got hundreds of different indicators that you can measure. But when I'm starting, again, the same conversation where you don't want to go too broad, you also don't want to measure too many things because you don't want sustainability to be a hindrance or a burden for your employees, right? Because especially if you're not at the stage where you have a sustainability manager and it's maybe one employee who's kind of helping track this progress, you just want to, track a couple of things. So for example, that could be dollar amounts that you're giving to different programs. That could be the number of children that you're supporting with wood. It could be the quantity of wood that you're sourcing, every year. Or if you're paying for certifications, you could talk about how much money have you donated towards these, causes. It can also be kind of growth over time. So maybe in 2020, you donate X amount, or you plant X amount of trees, or you're sourcing X pounds of sustainable wood. Well, then you track it 6 months later or a month later, depending on how big your company is. And you measure that growth rate over time. So you've got quantities, you've got dollars, and you've got a percentage over time. So that's kind of the way that I start the framework. And then you can apply that to the jobs. The same thing, how many people are employed? How are they all full-time? Are they part-time? Are they getting an increase in salary? Are you contributing to, postgraduate education, et cetera? And then for the kids, the same thing. How many school children are you supporting? How many, as a result of your direct contributions, were able to graduate school? How many, went on to postgraduate college afterwards that maybe wouldn't have? Like, there's a lot of different things that you can do. And you want to make sure you're mixing quantitative metrics with qualitative. So that's where those feel-good snippets are, where you're actually talking to the kids, or you're having a conversation with one of the workers about the difference in the community. So when you're creating an impact report or even a social post, you want to, blend both.
Got it. So the nice thing about that is, I think what frightens people is that quantitative piece, because how do I, as a small business or even a large business, you get so consumed with all of the day-to-day work. And I think today, with people working virtually still, or a blended work environment, some virtual, some in the office, you have that sense of, how do we tell this story? Because now we're not there to see it, to share it, to really get our arms around it. So I think having that, both that quantitative and the qualitative, takes some of that fear away, because part of what I'm hearing you say is, at least start. Choose one, start, and then you can build from there. And it doesn't make you less than. But if you're in motion, it's not less than. It's the fact that you've started.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it's just being intentional. If you can only measure twice a year, that's fine. So then twice a year, kind of like we talked about, sending out those surveys, and whether it's customer facing and kind of like what they feel about the brand, or if it's to your supply chain or to, your workers, having a survey that can be literally 10 questions, and maybe 5 of them are quantitative and then 5 of them are qualitative, and you're getting those quotes and those snippets. And if you're going to do that twice a year and you're setting up that cadence, you're already building a repository of data that you can leverage, right? But then at the beginning, if you're like, all right, cool, I'm going to start this program, but I want to post about it and I don't have anything, then maybe what you need to do is say, okay, every month for the next 6 months, I'm going to do 2 posts. Maybe 1 post a month is going to be more environmental and 1 is going to be social. So that means each month I'm going to have to either, get a photo and maybe 1 snippet, or I'm going to have to, make some kind of plan where I have that information. And maybe it's not that deep impact report, kind of thing, but it's more high level, just kind of feel good information that's going to give that consumer enough to be interested and know what we're doing. But it's not that, scientific impact report. It's a very different language, right? You're trying to excite versus inform that reader. So it doesn't have to be as heavy.
Got it. Celina, let me ask you a question. And I think people who are listening are going to have this question running in their mind. they may be saying, wow, you know what, we've not taken advantage, or we're not doing as much with our social impact as we should be.
Yeah.
We could use help from somebody who really understands also the marketing of it. So if somebody wants to contact you and to look at how do we do that, are you at this time available to take on clients, and what would that look like?
Sure. I love that question. Thank you for asking. I definitely am available to take on clients. Right now, I'm in the middle of kind of doing a relaunch of my website, but I'm available on LinkedIn, and I'll actually give you my contact information to post in the show notes. And you can definitely reach out, and I offer, free consultations to every client to kind of understand where they're at and assess, kind of what they would need to move forward and what our working together relationship would look like. But if for whatever reason, they feel like they wanted a bigger agency or they wanted to go with someone else, I always recommend people, go straight to the internet. You can either Google it or you can go to LinkedIn, and you would just type in either social impact consultant, sustainability consultant, or sustainability agency would also be another way. And a lot of things will pop up, and it just kind of depends on your budget and your how far you're looking to go. I think if you're kind of starting, I would just go the consultant route. If you really want to do an overhaul, or if your business is very large and you feel like you need more intricate help, then outsource it to an agency, but it's going to be a lot more expensive. So it just depends on your budget.
Got it. So I appreciate that. And we'll make sure we have that information in the show notes for those of you who are listening, because Celina has this marvelous mix of both being knowledgeable about the sustainability issues, but also knowing how to use that for your branding. And to do it without the branding, applying it or attaching it to the branding is like, having water and not drinking it. So,
yeah.
So we'll make sure you all have that. We don't have a lot of time left, Celina, so I just want to give you some time to share what are some things that we've missed, that we haven't talked about, that you think are really important for people to think through. They're down this journey now. They're looking at how are we going to really be responsible globally, corporately, as citizens of this globe. What are your thoughts, your comments, and how do people manage this?
Yeah. And I think, again, it comes down to really having a good strategy. Even if you're launching a new product or if you're going to have some kind of new initiative, the first deep dive is market research, right? Before you do anything, and understanding kind of the baseline and where you're at. And for me, I think that is the most important thing. I think a lot of people are just in a rush to kind of get to that next step and slap something on and get moving and want to see their profitability and their margins go up right away as a result. But, sustainability isn't a short-term game, right? It's a long-term investment. And it's something that will pay off over time, but you have to be really strategic with it. And it has to make sense because, again, consumers are so smart and they will sniff out anything that they feel is being fake or if they're being sold to. So again, it really comes down to doing that research and thinking about the trends. Some big trends in sustainability for 2020 are, again, those circular solutions that we talked about, plastics. A lot of people are going plastic free now. If you're a product based, maybe that's something that you can think about. Sustainable finance is huge. ESG risk, or kind of microfinancing loans and investment is another way. Maybe if you're service oriented, or you have a little bit more capital and you want to make some investments, thinking about those environmental, social, governance risk factors that are going to impact your business and your industry, and see if you can maybe support, donate. Think about something called, there's green bonds and social impact bonds that you can do a little bit more reading on later, or follow up with me if you want to have a conversation about that you can invest in financially. If you're thinking, I don't really, have a product-based business, I'm not dealing with a supply chain, I'm just, again, a service-oriented professional. That's something that you could do, or you can think about human capital, emotional well-being and workplace programs, inclusivity, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those are other things that are really trending now, as I'm sure you know. So again, you can look internally in your organization, and we kind of touched on what being a B Corp is, but that certification shows that you're investing in your workforce and really trying to be as, inclusive and sensitive as possible. So again, it really comes down to you and your special sauce, and everybody's different. And so you really have to kind of do that work. And that's where, again, sometimes it's being a sustainability coach versus a consultant. Because, when we work together, I'm working to kind of figure out, well, what is that core issue and how are you trying to, bring it to light? And it takes a lot of investigation and a lot of research. But once you develop the foundation, that strategy moving forward becomes so much easier and more clear, because you know exactly who you are, you know what to talk about, you know what your consumers or your stakeholders expect from you.
You know, what's interesting as you talk, Celina, is really the process of looking at what you're going to do with sustainability is what needs you're going to meet. So, looking at the financial components as well, whether it's e-bonds or some of the microloans, and I think those are things that we don't think about very often as being part of this. And yet for many companies, that's sort of like an easy thing to go, wow, I could do that, right? We're involved in this, that, or the other thing, and I could just do that.
Totally.
Or, I do a lot of work with individuals, particularly in the inner city. And it could be, that becomes another story, right? But you just do it because you're a human being. You don't think about it in terms of why is it so important.
Right. And again, that's where it's like aligning your values and your mission and trying to see, even if something that you're doing doesn't necessarily seem like it goes with your company, but if you're investing a lot of time into it, then maybe that is worth bringing to light, right? And doing that assessment, saying, is this going to add value? And is this something that, externally people are going to understand and appreciate? Or is it something that I just keep for myself and my employees? Like, you have to kind of do that assessment. But a lot of times people want to see businesses doing good and making the world better, right? That was the whole point of the UN SDGs. So if you can tie it back to that, I would always recommend moving forward.
It is incredible. There's so much that all of us can do. Yeah. We talk about the needs, right? We talk about what is unfortunate in terms of what exists in our world. And yet there's so much that we can do that we just don't think about. So I appreciate that, what you've shared, because it just helps us to be, I think, more conscious upfront about what it is that we can do. So for those of you who are listening, we will have available to you some of this information that Celina has been speaking about, so you have access to that. We will also have information about her in terms of being able to reach her. If you have trouble, simply contact us. We will help you get in contact with her so you don't lose that possibility. And so both as a consultant, and some of you just may need her as a coach to help you as you progress in the process. So encourage you to think about, what is it that you're doing within your companies, and how can you be more thoughtful about your role in the impact that you're having, and are you measuring it and telling your story? So Celina, thank you so much. You have been such a great gift to have on this podcast. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, you too. Bye.
You've been listening to Building My Legacy podcast with Dr. Lois Sonstegard. To book your appointment with Dr. Sonstegard, visit www.buildtomorrow.com.